From the perspective of dialectical behaviour therapy, emotions are neither positive nor negative. They just are. It's our own personal experience of our emotions that we can label as either positive or negative. And in DBT, we recognise that there are 10 of these emotional experiences, under which there's a whole bunch of different feelings that we can label and then use to describe what it is that we're going through. It's also really important that we get into this work with the solid understanding that emotions are not problems to be solved. They're actually experiences that we have to learn to accept and then process in a way that supports us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be, particularly in areas of life that are incredibly important to us. Each of these necessary emotional experiences does 3 things within our personality. First, they send a message to our system that there's something we need to address. Second, they activate a behavioural response. And third, they send a signal out to the world around us that we're actually going through something. When it comes to the individual behavioural responses for these emotional experiences, there are both effective and ineffective learned versions of each. And this is true for every emotional experience that gets activated within us. One of the 10 emotional experiences that ultimately we want to learn to accept is sadness. And underneath it, we find something that people often bring up in the meetings I facilitate, something that's definitely one of the more difficult and uncomfortable experiences that we have to go through as human beings: grief. So today, let's talk about the way we process sadness and in particular grief to help develop our capacity to deal with these feelings in an adaptive and effective way. Every emotional experience that we go through serves a specific purpose within our personality system. They exist for a reason. We're meant to experience them, even though at times they may be the last thing we want to face up to. When it comes to sadness, it exists within our personality specifically to draw attention to something important to us that we've lost or that we're about to lose. And sometimes this sense of sadness can lead us into a space of grief. The grieving process itself used to be something that many people believe to be a linear experience, one where we went through 5 specific stages involving denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. But over the years, we've learned that grieving is simply not as straightforward and definitely not as linear as this. And it's also true that there are many different things that we can go through the grieving process for. The obvious one is people. When we lose someone important to us, grieving is a natural thing for us to do. But we can also grieve the loss of many other things that we find incredibly important, things that we might not even realize we're grieving for, but nevertheless it is what we're doing. Things like a family pet, a job, a house, even a city or a particular lifestyle. Anything at all that was really important and is now lost to us. We also have to remember that we're human. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We have many different emotional experiences, most of which are activated by a dominant story that's playing out within our personality system. These stories can change from moment to moment at the drop of a hat, often without warning of any particular kind. Sometimes the emotional experiences that go with our own personal stories are incredibly intense, and sometimes they can be quite mild, but as human beings we are constantly reacting to whatever the emotional experience is within our personality system. If we feel at ease, safe or content, our behaviours are designed to match these feelings. If we feel tense, afraid, sad or lonely, again our behaviours are designed to match. If these emotional experiences are something we deeply fear, then we fight to avoid facing them. And this is what leads to the suffering that's created when avoiding emotional pain. So if the grieving process is not a straightforward and linear thing, how do we begin to look at it from the perspective that helps us to face it, to maintain our capacity to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be in areas of life that are particularly important to us? How do we face the emotional pain without creating emotional suffering? For me, this is when understanding our personality from the schema therapy perspective really comes into its own. We are multiplistic entities. In other words, our personality system is made up of multiple parts, each of which has a voice, a belief, a mode of behaviour, and often a really strong opinion. An opinion connected to a story that needs to be heard and understood in order to have the emotional experience that goes with the story feel validated. And learning how to self-validate our own emotional experiences is also a basic principle of dialectical behaviour therapy. If an emotional experience isn't validated from either an external or an internal source, the intensity of the emotion naturally ramps up, pushing the need for the opinion and therefore the story to be heard and understood in order to quell the uncomfortable feelings. When we apply these principles to the emotional experience of sadness, and in particular the grieving process, it's important to understand it from this multiplistic point of view. When something or someone that's important to us has been lost, there are so many different parts of our personality involved in the grieving process. As an individual person, we can only exist in the present moment, as technically speaking, this is actually the only place we can physically be. But when we find ourselves in a grieving process, we're often caught in what I find it easiest to describe as a state of limbo. While physically existing in the present moment, at the same time, there are parts of our personality that want to go back to the past. Maybe it's to fix things, to experience something one last time, or maybe it's to complete something that feels incomplete. Then there are parts of our personality that want to move into the future, to just get over it, to get on with life, and mainly to get rid of the pain and suffering that we're currently experiencing. There are so many different emotional experiences and therefore feelings connected to these specific desires. And in grief, we're trapped in limbo, stuck between the past and the future, not knowing which direction to go. One moment wanting to go back and the next wanting to go forward, but rarely wanting to be in the present moment, reacting to whatever the emotional experience is that's active in our system at that particular time. And this can obviously be an extremely painful emotional experience. And as I said before, our emotions are not problems to be fixed in any way. In fact, if we spend our time trying to fix them by avoiding them, blaming others for their activation, pushing them away without speaking about them, and basically running away from them by whatever means necessary, they typically just get worse. Emotions contain an experience that's important for us to accept, to validate, and ultimately to process in a healthy and effective way. In dialectical behaviour therapy, the primary equation we come back to so we can do this is emotional pain minus acceptance equals emotional suffering. What this is basically trying to tell us is that it's the fight against the emotional pain, something that's completely unavoidable, that causes the emotional suffering. Emotional pain is just simply a part of life, something that's going to happen from time to time in areas of life that are important to us, areas of life that hold meaning. Emotional suffering, on the other hand, is something we can actually take on with the practice of acceptance. And once again, though, we come up against this term acceptance. It's a sentiment we've discussed in several other videos, one that gets thrown around all the time, often without a solid understanding of what it actually means to carry it out. In this case, if we want to accept the emotional pain that goes with the grieving process, we have to accept each and every part of our personality that's involved in this emotionally uncomfortable experience, providing a space for each part to be heard and understood, to acknowledge the existence of each emotional experience, along with each of the stories connected to them. The stories are what brings the emotional experience into our personality system, and it's the stories that each specific part of our personality is holding on to, trying to have them heard and trying to have them witnessed. Sometimes this witnessing process requires the act of mindful journaling. Sometimes it involves talking to specific people within our primary support network, and sometimes there's a sequence of behavioural actions we need to follow in order to pay homage and have the part of our personality that's holding the story feel exactly what it needs to feel. It's about allowing each part to work through what it needs to work through without judgment for its point of view, to listen with compassion, empathy, understanding and forgiveness. And sometimes the reason we do this is to actually feel complete, and sometimes it's not. Acceptance doesn't mean that we feel okay with the way things are. It means we accept the emotional experience without judgment for its presence. Each grieving process is unique to the individual, so what this looks like is never exactly the same. Processing the emotion of sadness means accepting, validating and witnessing the stories each part of our personality is holding on to. These stories can change and shift as we go about our day, as each part is reminded of something they want to talk about or something they want to do. DBT provides the skills we need to listen without judgment through mindfulness and distress tolerance. Schema therapy gives us the understanding we need for why these stories exist. When we combine these two using the skills of emotion regulation, we're given the opportunity to go through the grieving process in a way that's effective for us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be. Without judgment, with compassion and curiosity, and where necessary, with forgiveness, and always while working towards what we know as unconditional self-acceptance. Guys, if this video spoke to you in any way, please subscribe to the channel and throw a like on it, and follow us on all our social media platforms to stay up to date with everything we do at The Liberation Place. If you want to know more about this or anything to do with schema therapy and DBT, come join us in the live online meetings that I provide each week on Zoom for free. I'll leave a link to these groups in the description below. Hope this video gave you some insight for how we can work through a grieving process in a healthy and effective way using the skills of DBT and schema therapy. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, be safe, and be well.